Hello everyone. This is Dr. Indrani Deb, Principal Nistarani College, Purulia. Today I will speak about Hard Times, Dickens's Hard Times, a critique of utilitarianism. And if you like the lecture, then I will request all of you to like and subscribe to the channel. Let me first discuss what is utilitarianism. This philosophy was first propounded by Jeremy Bentham, and later it was modified and developed by John Stuart Mill. This has often been regarded as a hedonistic philosophy, as it is based on the concept of the pursuit of happiness. This philosophy of utilitarianism has been widely debated, analyzed, and criticized to this day. However, during the 19th century, in spite of various other philosophical premises, including Marxism and other religious movements, most of British government policies and the official education policy were founded on the utilitarian principle of providing the greatest pleasure while minimizing pain. The main idea of this philosophy has often been regarded as the greatest happiness of the greatest number. There have been, of course, various arguments regarding the development or the definition of pleasure and pain. What do we mean by pleasure and pain? Connections have been found with Aristotle's theories of eudaimonia, which consists not merely of physical pleasure, but that based also on the mind and spirit. Eudaimonia is the highest good for all human beings, and virtue is an essential part of eudaimonia. This idea of what is pleasure and what is pain, this has been one of the major debates regarding utilitarianism. Utilitarianism also has often been regarded as an outcome of capitalism and an opposition to the theory of laissez-faire. During the 19th century, the theory of laissez-faire was supposed to be the basis of government policy. We will come back to it. Laissez-faire is the policy by which the individual is considered to be the unit of a society, and government intervention is strongly minimized in all economic and sociological individual dealings. We come to the first propounder of this philosophy, Jeremy Bentham, 1748 to 1832. It was Bentham who first established that government intervention is actually beneficial as it aims at the greatest good for the greatest number. The rules of the laws and the rules of the government are to be judged through their usefulness to the individual. This was the general idea. If all governmental policies are evaluated according to the utilitarian felicific calculus, this felicific calculus was an algorithm formulated by Bentham for calculating the degree or amount of pleasure that a specific action is likely to cause. If all government policies is evaluated according to this calculus, then the theory of laissez-faire is automatically negated. But Bentham also catalogued a complete agenda for the government. A short example of this agenda, I'm quoting from him, is this: to establish poor laws, hospitals for the indigent, workhouses for the unemployed, to levy taxes for redistribution purposes, and to decrease the need for direct taxes, to recompense victims of crime when the perpetrator is indigent, to safeguard national security and establish courts and internal police, to disseminate useful information to industry, to label poisonous substances, to guarantee marks for quality and quantity on goods, to set a maximum price for corn, to engage in public works, to put the unemployed to work, and finally, to establish institutes, boards, and universities. This list is more or less sufficient to assess the extent to which Bentham has shifted from the typical laissez-faire standpoint. Under Jeremy Bentham, James Mill, who was the father of John Stuart Mill, and John Austin, who was a legal theorist, utilitarianism became the basis of the 19th century reform movement called philosophical radicalism. The next great person, of course, there are many other propounders, persons who assisted Jeremy Bentham, but the greatest of all the theorists of utilitarianism was John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill's Principles of Political Economy, which was published in 1848, leans more towards Marxist liberalism and collectivism. He even advocates a redistribution of land along with a redistribution of wealth. He was never a complete socialist. He was actually too elite and intellectual for that. But he did advocate state intervention in education and administration. One of the primary areas of utilitarian policy is in the sphere of education. Its education policy culminates in the Education Act of 1870. And one of the major ideals of utilitarianism was that the end justifies the means. This is a point which will be criticized greatly by Dickens in Hard Times. And the end justifies the means. The end means happiness, and anything that assists happiness can be accepted. The utilitarian education policy is the center of our discussion now. The basic points of this policy are the age-related classroom system. Of course, we will be able to identify with this policy in India particularly, because this is the policy that has been handed over to us by the British government. Age-related classroom system, education according to a fixed curriculum. The education is teacher-centric and not student-centric. Examinations will be held at the end of the course, and the results of the examination are quantifiable. There is no special importance given to individual talent. There is no identification of individual abilities, and the students they have to learn and memorize information. It is also a diegetic form of education, which is the opposite of the mimetic form, which was defined by Aristotle. Mimesis shows by directly represented action, and diegesis tells through an all-knowing narrator. Mimesis emulates, adapts, reworks, enriches, and diegesis instructs, lectures, and is didactic. And this is the form, the diegetic form, which is used in the education policy of utilitarianism. The idea of the policy is to teach the students the basic skills necessary for running the society in such a way as to benefit the greatest number. The aim of the education is financial security and social status. Only those subjects are taught that will provide these things, the financial security and social status. And it is an elite form of education. Also, it is a highly fact-based system of learning. Morality is also judged by the same principle, the greatest good for the greatest number. So, this is in short the education policy of the utilitarian system. When we come to Victorian England, by the time we come to the Education Act of 1870, the economic and education systems are strongly influenced by utilitarianism. The rise of the welfare state is a direct outcome of the problems and disparities rising out of capitalism. State interference became essential after the disparity became extreme. Several laws were passed for workers' welfare, such as the minimum wage law or the 8-hour day. The hard fact way of life is reflected in the hard fact mode of education. This caters to social needs rather than individual needs. In capitalist society also, the individual identity of people becomes lost in the needs of the capitalists and the needs of profit. Practical considerations of career and usefulness to the society are the factors that mark the curriculum of schools. This system of education was also spread throughout the colonies, including India, and this system exists till today in India. Now we come to Dickens's Hard Times, keeping this idea of education in mind. Hard Times is directly an anti-utilitarian satire. It was, in fact, dedicated to Thomas Carlyle, who had also criticized the utilitarian philosophy in Sartor Resartus. Hard Times was first serialized in Household Words in 1854. This magazine, Household Words, was his own weekly magazine, Dickens's own magazine. Hard Times had 20 serials from 1st April to 12th August 1854. Hard Times is preceded by Bleak House and followed by Little Dorrit. The three novels together are called the Dark Period novels. The novel Hard Times projects the utilitarian system of education against a backdrop of capitalist industrialism, which is symbolized by Coketown, the background of this novel. It projects the two basic classes in a capitalist setup. The capitalists who define the education system and the working class who are normally not included in it. In the middle, there are the circus folk who are neither the producers nor profiteers. They provide pure entertainment, which is considered a waste of time by the utilitarians. The tussle between the two classes becomes highlighted when Sissy Jupe, daughter of a circus clown, joins the Mr. Gradgrind school, which school is based on the utilitarian system of education. This is one of the pictures we have of Coketown, a dark, bleak town. We come to Coketown. Now, we have a very detailed description of Coketown in Hard Times, the novel. I will just read a little bit of it so that it becomes clear. It was a town of red brick, or of brick that would have been red if the smoke and ashes had allowed it. But as matters stood, it was a town of unnatural red and black, like the painted face of a savage. It was a town of machinery and tall chimneys, out of which interminable serpents of smoke trailed themselves for ever and never got uncoiled. It had a black canal in it, and a river that ran purple with ill-smelling dye, and vast piles of building full of windows, where there was a rattling and a trembling all day long, and where the piston of the steam engine worked monotonously up and down like the head of an elephant in a state of melancholy madness. This is more or less sufficient to give an idea of what Coketown looks like. Basically, Coketown is based on Manchester, but is the representative of any industrial town, Hanley, Pittsburgh, Birmingham, etc. It is referred to as the keynote of the novel, the main note on which the novel moves. The keynote is also the philosophy of hard fact that underlies both the town and Mr. Gradgrind's school. And this entails a complete rejection of imagination, beauty, or joyous entertainment from life and education. Life projected through Coketown and education through the school. The primary impression of the town is of blackness and monotony. The red brick walls have been blackened by the black smoke that fills the black sky. The canal passing through it is black. The river nearby is purple with ill-smelling dye. The monotony also is remarkable. The coils of smoke are interminable. The shape and color of all the buildings are the same. The sound of the piston of the steam engine never changes. All the streets are the same, and even the people are the same, wearing the same clothes, going in and out at the same hours, and doing the same kind of work. The men are only hands, and they are only part of the huge machine of the factory. What we find is that the animate and inanimate are interchanged. The inhabitants of the town are described in terms of an inanimate machine. The machine itself is described in terms of an animate being. The coils of smoke are like serpents which never got uncoiled, and the steam engine perpetually works up and down like the head of an elephant in the state of melancholy madness. The impression is that the animate machines are superior to the inanimate workers. The stark materialism is the perfect background of Gradgrind's school. We come to Gradgrind's school now. The very first chapter of the book gives us a description of the school. Here we find that the word square is repeatedly used in the description of both Gradgrind and his school, which points to the practical thrust of the education. This practical bias is also at the basis of the utilitarian view of education. The teachers, Gradgrind and Coketown, both are type characters whose names reflect their characters. The students are compared to the story of Morgiana and the 40 Thieves. This story is very important actually because of the aim and purpose of the school and the satire that Dickens is aiming at it. This is the description. He went to work in this preparatory lesson, not unlike Morgiana in the 40 Thieves, looking into all the vessels ranged before him, one after another, to see what they contained. Say, good Mr. M. Coketown, when from thy boiling store thou shalt fill each jar brimful by and by, dost thou think that thou wilt always kill outright the robber fancy lurking within, or sometimes only maim him and distort him? This is extremely important because most of the time, fancy is never killed off. It is maimed and distorted. And what in the three main students of the school, we find that fancy has been killed off only in Bitzer, but in nobody else has it been killed off. It has been maimed and distorted, and that is the beginning of the problem. Now, so we have Morgiana and the 40 Thieves. We come back to the students. The students described in the first chapter are Issy and Bitzer, who are a study in contrast. The contrast between these two will be referred to again, but the difference between them is underlined at the onset through their description. This is a part of the description, but whereas the girl was so dark-eyed and dark-haired that she seemed to receive a deeper and more lustrous color from the sun when it shone upon her, the boy was so light-eyed and light-haired that the self-same rays appeared to draw out of him what little color he ever possessed. Bitzer's eyes are cold and pale, whereas Sissy's are warmly colored. This is the basic difference, and this difference will go throughout the novel. In this school, no importance is given to practical knowledge. For example, there is the definition of a horse. Obviously, this is diegetic knowledge. Sissy is the daughter of a circus clown and has lived with horses all her life. But when she was told to describe a horse, she is stuck. On the other hand, Bitzer, who has never come near a horse in his whole life, he at once defines a horse thus: quadruped, graminivorous, 40 teeth, namely 24 grinders, 4 eye teeth, and 12 incisive. Sheds coat in the spring, in marshy countries, sheds hoofs too. Hoofs hard, but requiring to be shod with iron. Age known by marks in the mouth. And this goes on. The final irony is when Gradgrind turns to Sissy and says, "Now, girl number 20, you know what a horse is," as if she had never known a horse in her life. The knowledge, therefore, is thus taught in the school is delivered through lectures, without any basis in practical life. And the refrain of the novel is there in the first chapter itself. Fact, 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 says the government official. Fact, 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 echoes Thomas Gradgrind. Gradgrind's education is carried on at home. Louisa and Tom, his first two children, they are brought up strictly on the philosophy of fact. Whatever is said of Gradgrind, he is not a hypocrite. He actually believes that the utilitarian system of education is the best. That is why he diligently educates his children in his method. The loophole, this is the title of the third chapter, is not only a hole in the circus tent, it is also the gap in their education, which will later lead to tragedy. That the gap in their education is the ruthless banishment of fancy and imagination from the lives of Gradgrind's children. This is understood by them only much later when it is too late. The first two children we have to discuss is Issy and Bitzer, because they are a study in contrast. The primary contrast in hard times is between fact and fancy. It is a debate between reason and imagination, between logic and common sense. Fact implies the whole world of materialistic thinking, and fancy represents all the emotional and instinctive faculties of mankind. Sissy, Jupe, and Bitzer are representative embodiments of these contrasting ideas. Because of this, they have become almost allegorical characters. Bitzer is one in whom emotion and imagination have been completely banished. He is the prize student of the school. And Sissy is the representation of emotion and imagination. And she is incapable of imbibing the facts taught in the school. Because of this, they are both flat characters according to the terminology of E.M. Forster. The flat characters do not change in the novel, like, say, later on Louisa or her father do. Louisa and her father Gradgrind, they both change according to the circumstances. Bitzer is the other student, the opposite of Sissy. The best description of Bitzer is given by the author himself. He was an extremely clear-headed, cautious, prudent young man, saved to rise in the world. Immediately after, we are told that his mind was so exactly regulated that he had no affections or passions. All this is illustrated in the treatment of his mother later on. After his father's death, he discovered that his mother had a right of settlement in Coketown. He immediately sent her to the workhouse. His job in the bank was as a light porter, and he earned extra money by acting as a spy and informer. And in fact, he finds it quite natural in a man to line his own pockets by spying on his colleagues. It is he who identifies Tom as the real thief in Bounderby's bank. This is the result of the nicest and coldest calculation on his part, and it is also he who catches Tom just as he is about to be sent away to safety with the help of Sleary's circus, the circus that Gradgrind had so vehemently opposed previously. The final conversation between Bitzer and Mr. Gradgrind is the true comment on the utilitarian system of education. This is summed up in the line, "My schooling was paid for it was a bargain, and when I came away, the bargain ended. Now, this last conversation between Bitzer and Gradgrind is extremely important. It was a fundamental principle of I'm reading out from this part. It was a fundamental principle of the Gradgrind philosophy that everything was to be paid for. Nobody was ever on any account to give anybody anything or render anybody help without purchase. Gratitude was to be abolished, and the virtues springing from it were not to be. Every inch of the existence of mankind from birth to death was to be a bargain across the counter. And Bitzer said, "I don't deny," said Bitzer, "that my schooling was cheap. But that comes right, sir. I was made in the cheapest market and have to dispose of myself in the dearest." This is the comment that Gradgrind has to suffer from the prize student of his school. Mr. Gradgrind appeals to Bitzer. "Have you a heart?" And Bitzer, smiling at the oddity of the question, replies, "The circulation, sir, couldn't be carried on without one." Bitzer categorically tells his old teacher that his motive for taking young Tom back was that Bounderby, in gratitude, would give him a raise to the post which Tom had previously occupied. After all, the whole system is one of self-interest. We come to Sissy Jupe, the opposite person. Sissy is on the other side of the coin, of which one side is fact and the other is fancy. She represents loving humanity and as such is quite incapable of grasping factual knowledge. While talking to Louisa later about her inability to learn, she cannot distinguish between national prosperity and natural prosperity, or between statistics and stutterings. Now, this is obviously an element of satire. Statistics is supposed to be the same as stutterings. She is ignorant of facts, but she has an instinctive knowledge of good and evil and a natural common sense that saves Gradgrind's family during his greatest need. It is she alone who understands the proud Louisa. It is she who sits day by day with Rachel in her loneliness. It is she who finally discovers with Rachel where Stephen has disappeared. It is she who is the ultimate savior of Tom Gradgrind, devising a means of escape for the poor boy with the help of the circus, which has been so harshly rejected by Gradgrind. She has the ability to understand people, and she always extends a hand of help in whatever way she can. In the dry, loveless world around her, she stands as the source of gentleness, good sense, understanding, and dependability. When Gradgrind brought her into his home, he himself did not realize that he was doing the best thing possible for his family. She is the standing contradiction to his education system, being like a breath of fresh air, a ray of light in the cold, hard atmosphere of Stone Lodge. And we also have to remember that it is not just what she does that makes her so important. It is simply her presence that matters. Without lecturing even once, she manages to make everyone feel that something is missing from their lives, that the power of fancy and love and kindness is far greater than that of mere intellectual knowledge. This is obviously the opposite of the diegetic method. Finally, Gradgrind himself, that staunch upholder of the philosophy of fact, is forced to say brokenly at the end, I have a misgiving that some change may have been slowly working about me in this house by mere love and gratitude. She represents the power of fancy, kindness, and love. We come to the other two characters, the two children of Gradgrind, in whom fancy had not been killed, but merely maimed and distorted. The first is Louisa Gradgrind's eldest child. Louisa is the protagonist of the novel and the only female character who cannot be regarded as a type like Sissy or Mrs. Gradgrind or Rachel or Mrs. Sparsit. Louisa, in fact, is the only rounded character in the novel, apart from partly her father. She and her brother Tom have been educated in her father's school according to the utilitarian or hard fact system of education. Imagination and emotion have been consciously kept away from them, and they have had no access to fairy tales, music, or mythical stories. Their lives are controlled by the multiplication table and a pair of scales. As such, she has grown up into a hard-headed bundle of facts, and her mind is in total control of her emotions or fanciful flights of imagination. She is a handsome girl, of course, but her face is totally closed and silent and seemingly unfeeling. She is highly educated and knowledgeable, but with a kind of knowledge that is useless in practical life. That is why, when actually faced with emotional problems or problems related to other people, like Rachel or Stephen, she is at a loss as to what to do. Regarding her own emotional crisis, she is a complete failure. That is why, after escaping from Hart House, she goes straight to her father and confesses for the first time her inmost feelings. This is what she tells him. You have never nurtured in me. What you have never nurtured in me, you have never nurtured in yourself. But oh, if you had only done so long ago, or if you had only neglected me, what a much better and much happier creature I should have been this day. And at the end of the conversation, she cries out to him in one of her most telling comments on his education system. All that I know is your philosophy and your teaching will not save me. Now, Father, you have brought me to this. Save me by some other means. Yet, beneath the hard fact exterior, there is a small child in her yearning for love and tenderness. The words never wonder have been drilled into her from childhood. Every time she has ever shown the slightest interest in matters of the imagination or just plain enjoyment, it has been nipped in the bud. During the one time that she showed a spontaneous interest in the circus that had come to town, she had been so strictly berated by both her father and Bounderby that even this kind of interest was driven away from her system. Louisa knows that her father is a kind person beneath his hard exterior, but she has never attracted any show of affection from him except at the end when she comes to him brokenly. He has never understood her, And that is the one reason why she agrees to marry Bounderby, a man she hates. Again, perhaps she could have escaped this disastrous marriage if she had insisted on showing her emotions to her father, but she did not do so. From a young age, she has been left to her own resources and has developed a habit of staring into the fire. The fire image is constantly connected with her. She has developed a habit of staring for hours at the sparks falling from the fire, a habit which her brother Tom cannot understand. It is as if she sees the ashes of her useless life in the sparks falling from the fire. Looking into the fire, she also wonders about what will finally happen to herself and Tom in the future, though she has been taught never wonder from childhood. This fire image is also related to the incessant smoke emanating from the chimneys of Coketown, which she stares at when her father breaks to her his wish that she should marry Bounderby. She has an unconditional love for her brother, and Harthouse tries to win her heart through Tom. She can understand her brother's frustration, for her own frustration stems from the same source. It is only after her separation from her husband that she comes closer to Sissy Jupe, which symbolically means that she is coming closer to Fancy, because Sissy represents fancy. It is only then that she feels far more at peace in her heart than she has ever had before. She becomes a sadder and wiser woman at the end, but her background has marked her out for tragedy. When she watches the fire in the last chapter of the novel, she sees that she will never be a happy wife to anyone or a happy mother to happy children. The only reason is the rigid utilitarian system in which she has been brought up. The other failure of Thomas Gradgrind's system is his son Tom. The utilitarian system, according to which Tom has been brought up, has turned him into a selfish, extravagant idler, totally devoid of natural morality. Louisa takes consolation from her sense of uselessness by turning inward. Tom turns outward. The philosophy is of being self-serving. It is also a philosophy of personal ambition. Tom has learnt this from the philosophy of hard fact that he has been taught at school, and he has taken it literally to mean that nobody and nothing is more important than himself. Tom has grown up to care for nobody. His primary purpose was to get himself out from the strict restrictions of Stone Lodge and to enjoy life, something he has never been permitted to do at home. To do this, he used his sister Louisa, the one person who would sacrifice everything for him. In fact, one of the reasons for which she agreed to marry Bounderby was because Tom wanted her to do so, something he proudly tells Harthouse later, without the least conscience. As such, the moment he gets a job in Bounderby's bank, he idles, drinks and gambles, knowing that Bounderby would not be able to berate him, he being his wife's brother. It is therefore natural that Harthouse calls him the whelp. Harthouse has the greatest contempt for him, for Tom allows him to use him to come close to his sister. But Tom cannot understand this. Tom finally falls into debt and steals from Bounderby's bank to pay it back. It is finally Bitzer who discovers that Tom is the real thief and pursues him in order to hand him over to the law. It is Mr. Sleary's circus which finally helps him to escape the law And Mr. Sleary disguises him as a black clown. The black dye on his face is symbolic of the blackness of his heart. Like Louisa, he too comments to his father about the education system in which he has been brought up. After Tom tells Gradgrind about the manner in which he has committed the theft, his father says brokenly, "If a thunderbolt had fallen on me, it would have shocked me less than this." To which Tom grumbles back, "I don't see why. So many people are employed in situations of trust. So many people out of so many will be dishonest. I have heard you talk 100 times of its being a law. How can I help laws? You have comforted others with such things, father. Comfort yourself." Gradgrind can only bury his face in his hands after this. The novel is a scathing criticism of the utilitarian or the hard fact philosophy, and everyone in it who has followed it has to suffer in one way or the other. Tom has to die far away from his home in loneliness and disgrace, and Louisa's life is passed in emptiness and loneliness. Gradgrind too becomes a sadder and wiser man. The only one who does not have to suffer is Bitzer, for he is devoid of even the heart with which to suffer. He is the one in whom fancy has been totally killed off. Dickens in the novel argues for a balanced state of mind in which fact and fancy will have equal sway. Hard Times is a clear rejection of the utilitarian system of education and demands an education in which art, humanity, culture, and morality will be given equal importance. Thank you very much.